At 18, money feels like survival. At 30, it feels like freedom. At 60, it feels like a question no amount of money can answer. And by the end of this story, you'll realize money doesn't just change your life, it changes who you become. Money feels like survival. At 18, money doesn't feel powerful. It feels painfully small, but somehow heavy enough to sit on your chest. It's not about luxury, not about dreams, not even about getting ahead. It's about not having to ask, not having to text your parents for gas money, not having to check your bank account before ordering food with friends, not having to pretend you're not that hungry, because you already know you can't afford what everyone else is getting. At that age, every dollar carries emotion. A 20 feels like relief, 100 feels like control, and having nothing at all feels like shame, even when nobody says it out loud. You start to realize that money, in its rawest form, is not freedom yet, it's dignity. It's the difference between walking into the world feeling like a person with options, or like someone one small inconvenience away from falling apart. Money feels like quiet anxiety. At 21, money starts to feel less like a number and more like a shadow following you everywhere. You notice it in small moments first. The pause before tapping your card, the instinct to calculate the total before you even look at the menu, the way a normal Tuesday can feel slightly dangerous when your account is already too low. This is the age when life begins sending bills before it sends answers. Rent, groceries, gas, phone payments, small emergencies that never feel small when they happen to you. And what makes it worse is how invisible it all is. Nobody announces they're struggling. Everyone just keeps smiling, showing up, acting like adulthood is something they understand. But underneath that performance is the same quiet panic. The fear of one bad week, one missed shift, one surprise expense pulling everything apart. At 21, money doesn't feel like success yet. It feels like pressure. Money feels like a scoreboard. At 23, money stops feeling private. Even if nobody says it out loud, it starts to feel like a scoreboard. One friend gets a better job. Another moves into a nicer apartment. Someone you know is suddenly flying somewhere on a random weekend, posting rooftop photos with a caption about working hard. And without realizing it, you begin measuring your life through what money seems to say about your worth. Not just what you can afford, but what your life looks like compared to everyone else's. That's what makes this age so brutal. You're not only trying to survive anymore, you're trying not to feel behind. A low bank balance starts to feel like a personal failure. A good paycheck feels like proof that maybe you're finally catching up. But most people at 23 aren't chasing wealth. They're chasing reassurance that their life is moving in the right direction. Money feels like hope. At 25, money finally begins to feel a little less like panic and a little more like possibility. Maybe it's the first time you save a few $1,000s. Maybe it's the first month you make it to payday without feeling your chest tighten. Maybe it's paying off a credit card and staring at the zero balance longer than you expected to. From the outside, it doesn't look dramatic. Nothing about your life suddenly appears glamorous. But inside, something shifts. For the first time, money is no longer just disappearing as fast as it arrives. Some of it stays, some of it listens. Some of it starts to look like proof that your life is not just a cycle of catching up. At 25, money still isn't freedom. But it becomes something almost as powerful in that moment: hope. The quiet, fragile belief that maybe you are finally building, not just surviving. Money feels like a door. At 27, money stops being just a source of safety and starts becoming a source of questions. Bigger questions. You begin to wonder why working harder never seems to create enough distance between you and the life you actually want. You look at your paycheck, your bills, your routine, and realize that stability can become a trap if it never turns into leverage. So your thinking changes. You stop asking how to hold on to money and start asking how to make it move, how to make it grow, how to stop trading all of your time just to remain in the same place. This is where the mindset begins to evolve. You read more, you notice patterns, you become interested in ownership, in investing, in building something outside the limits of a salary. At 27, money feels like a door, and for the first time, you can see it slightly open. money feels like choice. At 30, money begins to feel less like a number in an account and more like the space around your life. Not because you suddenly have an extraordinary amount of it, but because you finally understand what even a modest amount can do. It can buy you time to think before making a bad decision. It can give you the power to leave a job that drains you, walk away from people who only loved the version of you that needed them, or say no without hearing panic in your own voice. That is the real shift. At 30, money is no longer just about paying for things. It starts to shape your standards, your boundaries, your ability to choose what kind of life you are willing to tolerate. And once you feel that for the first time, even briefly, you can never go back to seeing money as just paper. It starts to feel like freedom in its earliest form. Money feels like leverage. At 33, money stops feeling like a reward and starts feeling like a tool, a serious one. By now, you've lived long enough to understand that effort alone does not create wealth. Plenty of hardworking people stay exhausted for decades. So your relationship with money becomes more strategic. You stop admiring income and start admiring systems. You become obsessed with what earns while you sleep, what scales without asking for more of your life, what turns one good decision into 10 future ones. This is the age when money begins to look like leverage. Not flashy, not loud, but powerful in a quieter way. A well-placed investment, a business that keeps moving after hours, an asset that keeps growing while your attention is somewhere else. At 33, you no longer want money just to feel secure. You want it to start carrying weight for you. Money feels like exposure. At 35, money starts revealing things you didn't notice when everyone was still struggling together. As you become more stable, more capable, more selective, the people around you begin to react in ways that are harder to ignore. Some admire you. Some quietly resent you. Some only call when they need something. And some seem uncomfortable the moment your life no longer mirrors theirs. That's when you realize money doesn't just change your circumstances. It exposes the hidden structure of your relationships. Who celebrates your progress without making it about themselves? Who treats your discipline like luck? Who mistakes your boundaries for arrogance the second you stop saying yes to everything? At 35, money feels like exposure, not because it changes human nature, but because it shines a harsher light on what was already there. And once you see people clearly, it becomes very hard to go back to seeing them the old way. Money feels like time. At 40, the meaning of money becomes quieter, but far more profound. It's no longer about looking successful or proving that you made it. It's about how your days feel when you wake up. It's about whether your time belongs to you, or whether it is still being rented out piece by piece to obligations you never consciously chose. By this age, you begin to understand that the most luxurious thing money can buy is not a car, a watch, or a house. It is the ability to breathe, to spend a morning without urgency, to take care of your health before your body forces you to be present with the people you love without your mind being dragged back to bills, meetings, and unfinished work. At 40, money feels like time returned to you, slowly, almost tenderly, and once you experience that, you realize that was the real prize all along. Money feels like a mirror. At 45, money becomes harder to romanticize. By now, you've made enough decisions to see the pattern clearly. Money rarely changes who you are as much as it reveals what was already there. The ambitious become more ambitious. The fearful become more protective. The generous become more intentional, and the empty become louder. That is what makes this stage of life so confronting. You may have more than you once dreamed of, yet still feel a strange restlessness when the room gets quiet. Because money can solve pressure, but it cannot answer the deeper questions waiting underneath it. It cannot tell you whether the path you chose was worth the cost. It cannot tell you whether your success actually brought peace or just a more comfortable version of anxiety. At 45, money feels like a mirror, and not everyone likes what it reflects back when the numbers finally get high enough to remove the excuses. Money feels like distance. At 50, money begins to create a kind of distance you never expected when you were younger and praying for more of it. Not always physical distance, but emotional distance. conversational distance, the subtle space that opens when your life no longer fits easily inside the world you came from. Your old friends talk about bills, routines, and the same worries they've carried for years. You listen, but from somewhere slightly farther away than before, not because you think you're better, but because your frame has changed. Your risks are different now. Your responsibilities are different. The way you see time, opportunity, and loss no longer translates as easily. And that's the part nobody warns you about. At 50, money doesn't just buy comfort. It can quietly separate you from the people who knew you before you became this version of yourself. Money feels like responsibility. At 55, money stops feeling personal. It is no longer just about what you want, what you can afford, or what you've earned. It begins to feel like something larger than you, something that now carries the weight of other people's futures. You think less about spending and more about protecting, less about growth at all costs and more about structure, stability, and what happens if you are no longer the one making every decision. By this age, money starts touching everything: aging parents, children, health, legacy, risk, peace of mind. It becomes less glamorous and far more serious. Because the truth is, once enough people depend on the life you built, money is no longer freedom in the way it used to be. It becomes stewardship. At 55, money feels like responsibility. The quiet burden of knowing what you have can help, protect, and shape lives long after your own choices are made. Money feels like a question. At 60, money becomes a question no balance sheet can fully answer. You can count the assets, measure the returns, and list everything you built, but none of that tells you what it all meant. By this point, the numbers are no longer the mystery. You are. You look back at the years when you had nothing, the years when you were hungry for more, the years when ambition made every sacrifice feel justified, and now, with distance, you begin to ask the questions money spent decades distracting you from. What did it give you that truly mattered? What did it take that you can never get back? Who is still beside you now that the climb is mostly behind you? At 60, money no longer feels like survival, freedom, or even power. It feels like reflection. A final, quiet confrontation between the life you built and the life you lived. In the end, money feels like meaning. In the end, money doesn't settle into one final definition. It becomes a collection of meanings layered over a lifetime. At 18, it was dignity. At 21, it was pressure. At 25, it was hope. At 30, it was choice. At 40, it was time. At 60, it became a question. And somewhere between all those ages, you realize the strangest truth of all. Money never stayed the same, because you never stayed the same. Every stage of life asked something different from it, and every stage of life revealed something different about you. What once felt like survival later felt like leverage. What once felt like power later felt like distance. What once looked like the answer slowly became a mirror. In the end, money feels like meaning, not because it explains your life, but because it exposes what your life was really chasing all along. So maybe that's the real story. Money is never just money. Not when you're young and ashamed of needing it. Not when you're older and exhausted from chasing it. Not even when you finally have enough to stop being afraid. Because what changes across a lifetime is not just the number, it's the emotional weight the number carries. The fear, the pride, the hunger, the freedom, the regret, the distance, the peace. Money begins as something you think will fix your life. Then it becomes something you use to shape it. And if you're lucky, by the end, you understand it was never the destination, it was only the lens. A way of seeing who you were, what you valued, what you sacrificed, and what still remained when the noise was gone. In every season of life, money feels different, but the deeper truth is this. What it really tracks is not wealth. It tracks who you are becoming.